Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I'll be reviewing Chuck Klosterman's book, The 90s. I'll talk very briefly about the author, go into an overview of what the book is about, talk about what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, who I'd recommend the book to, and finish off with what I'll be reading for next time. Chuck Klosterman is a very famous cultural writer. He's written for Spin Magazine. He co-founded what was the website Grantland with Bill Simmons. He's done a lot of different writing for a lot of different publications, ESPN. The list goes on and on. He's been writing cultural essays probably since the early 90s. I think Sex, Drugs, and Cocoa Puffs came out in 93 or maybe 94. He's, I think, published several different collections at this point. I think this is probably his seventh, maybe eighth collection. I've read, obviously, this book, Consider the Dinosaur, For, and What If We're Wrong, which are a series of just each one is essentially the same format. It's really his essays on what he deems to be important or interesting about whatever topic he's talking about at the time, whatever topic really kind of gets him interested at the time. He writes in a very fun, funny style. If you haven't read him before, I don't know if I would tell you to start here. But what this book is, if it's not clear in the title, it's really Chuck Klosterman going back to almost his roots and talking about 90s culture and kind of re-examining cultural touchstones, cultural moments of the 1990s. Everything he touches on everything in this book from Kurt Cobain, the rise of grunge music. He talks about he mentions Tupac Shakur very briefly. He goes on to talk about crystal beverages. Talks about the baseball strike of 1994, the college football pre-playoff, how that existed, how they chose champions before. He talks about O.J. Simpson. He talks about Columbine. He talks about the Bush v. Gore election and how that had a huge impact on everything going forward. So it's all covered. The internet, the rise of the internet is probably the centerpiece of the book for me. He talks about the presidency of Bill Clinton towards the end of the book in a very, I thought, moving manner of the reexamination of Bill Clinton and how we look back on that time and see him in a very unique way. I enjoyed it. I did really enjoy it. I think he writes very funny. He has kind of a particular cadence to his writing that you kind of notice. He's a writer that you could, I don't want to say satirize easily, but he has certainly a style to his writing that's pretty consistent throughout his writing. He has they're punctured throughout the book. There's some really, really laugh out loud funny moments that I pulled the book away from me, just chuckled for a couple seconds. He has a line on O.J. Simpson that I thought was pretty funny. He has a line about Alan Greenspan and Alan Greenspan's relationship to objectivism that I thought was pretty funny. Um, yeah, I just really enjoyed it. It's really kind of him working, talking about just kind of everything under the sun, from TV to sports to all this stuff, and he has a pretty breezy style. It's not a very, I wouldn't consider it to be a very um, regimented way that he writes in terms of this topic, then this topic, then this topic. It is very much like a pretty free flow of ideas that kind of run into another. There are times the only really downside of the book I did feel uneven, but part of that unevenness is some of these things I care a little bit more about than other stuff. He has a pretty long section about the movie Titanic, where I think he sums up the movie Titanic pretty accurately, but it didn't really do anything for me. There are like I said, it's a little bit of an uneven book because it just the interest level was there. There are times where too I think he starts writing about something and that chapter kind of ends what feels like abruptly, and I'm like, well, what was the point of this that you're writing? And so there's times where I was reading it and I think the point was maybe lost to me, and there are parts in the book where I remember, well, I wish he had like stretched that out a little bit and talked a little bit more about that subject and maybe a little bit less about this one. Um, but I think if you are someone who's read him before, I very much enjoyed this. He covers similar ground to stuff he's written in the past. So he's written before about David Koresh and Kurt Cobain, Radiohead, Richard Linklater. So all the hits that he kind of obsesses about are here in this book. There are a couple times where I kind of didn't agree with his takes, but that's usually the case with Chuck Klosterman and myself. I remember reading What If We're Wrong, which is still probably my favorite of stuff that I've read of his, and being like, I don't think that would actually work in practice that way. Um, But overall, I really did enjoy it. I thought it was quite poignant at times and quite surprisingly moving. He has a section about the end of the last chapter of the book is really the lead up to Bush v. Gore in that election, and I think he looks at that through a little bit of a revisionist lens and actually trying to be an anti-revisionist and kind of bringing back people back. One of the themes that runs throughout the book is as people, it's easier for you to look at something in the past easier through the lens that you have now and your feelings about things now, and it's very difficult for us and sometimes uncomfortable to look back at things the way that we felt about them then through that prism. And I thought that that is a very interesting way of looking at things. And he does that. He talks about the Clarence Thomas nomination. He talks about the Clinton administration, like I mentioned before, the Clinton Lewinsky affair through that prism. Um, but I say the highlights of the book, if you were just to read certain sections of it, for some reason, the section on the internet I thought was really well done. Maybe one of the better things I've read, trying to explain what the internet was then and how culturally it's erased a lot of the there is an inevitable there you probably talk about kind of this inevitability about the internet, but when that actually happened and when it became something that was going to change everything, he has a really interesting way of framing that argument that I thought was really clever. I think that the section on Bill Clinton is really well done. The section on Bush v. Gore and the run up to Bush v. Gore and the aftermath of that election, I thought was really well done. He ties that into Y2K in a really interesting way. So I really enjoyed the book. I think the book it's uneven in spots, probably because there's some things I just am less interested in than others. There are other parts where I think he could have maybe made more of a point. And I read it, I would read it, and I was just like, I don't know what you're actually trying to make. There's a few points here and there where it's a little word salady for me. But overall, I really enjoyed the book. If you're a fan of Chuck Klosterman, I highly recommend it because it's more of the same. If you're someone who's looking to get into him, if you've never read him before, I probably would still start you with Thor or Consider the Dinosaur, I think is that book. Eating the Dinosaur is what the book is called, Eating the Dinosaur. And then to me, I still think What If We're Wrong, I think is a really uh, cool look at a lot of different things that did make me rethink um, certain topics kind of through his lens of the title, What If We're Wrong? What if this is not actually the truth? Chuck Klosterman, the 90s. And next time I will be reading Tim Powers and Nubis Gates, kind of a pretty classic mashup science fiction fantasy novel. Until next time, if you've enjoyed this, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. I'll leave the link below to my Twitter so you can follow me there. Until next time, bye.